oh crap moment, quite frankly, and they've been breached. We published reports my company did in 2014 that had a lot of the allusions to what just happened, but sometimes you have to have it happen before you recognize, oh wow, that was really on the table. I doubt it'll happen again, but now we're having the dialogue to make sure that it doesn't.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been a very good panel, and I want to talk about one of our most significant vulnerabilities as it relates to cybersecurity. I have been working for some time now with Congressman Ted Lieu of California, who is a real expert in this field, and one of the things that I'm particularly troubled by is our vulnerabilities in what's called SS7, Signaling System 7. And this essentially allows cellular networks to be able to talk to one another. And we seem to have some very significant vulnerabilities that could allow a foreign actor, Russians and a variety of other interests hostile to our country, to hack, tap, or track an American's mobile phone. And the hackers could be just about anybody, but certainly a foreign, government, and the victim could be just about any American. I think, Dr. Ridd, and I welcome anyone who'd like to talk, but I think, Dr. Ridd, you've done some serious analysis of these vulnerabilities in SS7, and I would be interested in hearing, A, how serious you think this is, and B, what do you think our government ought to do about it, particularly in connection to the topic at hand, which is dealing with these Russian hacks?
Thank you for this very specific question, although I have to say that I'm not an SS7 expert and I don't want to pretend to be one here. But the technology that you're referring to is certainly a weak point and can easily be exploited, ultimately because it is a trust-based system, a trust-based protocol. And if you have a landscape of a lot of mobile phone providers, it's relatively easy to undermine that one entity can essentially exploit the trust here. There are ways to remedy the problem, but I will just add one observation that and I think many people in Congress will be doing this already, if you use an encrypted app for your communications, then you will most likely defeat some of that vulnerability there.
Well, I hope that's the case. I think the Congressman and I have been concerned that may not be enough, because largely what has happened thus far is there have been self-regulatory approaches, and that and other approaches weren't pursued. So we're going to continue this discussion, and as I understood it, you had talked to some of our folks, and you may not consider yourself an expert, but our folks thought you were very knowledgeable.
Well, if I may respond?
Sure.
I think we're looking in multiple ways at market failures here. So two-factor authentication, which I mentioned, we're looking at a market failure there because it's still an opt-in situation. And if you have an opt-in situation, most people will not opt in and hence remain vulnerable. There are the market, when we look at active measures, and this is one of the most fundamental ethical dilemmas here. The market favors disinformation today. And I'm happy to go into specifics and how we can remedy this if you like.
Well, the Congressman and I feel that we ought to get the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, off the dime too, because it is clear that they have been slow walking the various kinds of approaches that could provide an added measure of security. Let me ask one other question, and any of you three can get into it. In January, the IC assessment, the intelligence community assessment, said that Russian intelligence accessed elements of multiple state or local electoral boards. So I asked the FBI director then what exactly had been compromised and what was the nature and the extent of the compromise. Director Comey responded that the Russians had attacked state voter registration databases and taken data from those databases. Can you all add anything else to that? Any of you three are welcome to do it, because that sounds to me like pretty alarming stuff. The FBI director in January, and I wish I'd had more time to get into it with him, essentially said that this was a problem, and I would be curious whether you knew anything more about this topic. We can even just go right down. No. Doug?
I don't. I have talked to one of the secretaries of states on just this, and the issue that you brought up, the polling data, the data registration data, is something that's at risk and something that the states are looking at. So I do think that's important.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you for being here and testifying. I think maybe we assume that people know more about what we're talking about than maybe they actually do. So I'd like to kind of get basic, maybe for my benefit, and maybe some other people will learn some things as well. But I think we've referred to something that's called spear phishing. And so I'd like to have one of you explain what that is. Let me just tell you, by the way, occasionally my junk email box on my personal email, I'll get emails that purport to be from the FBI director or the Army Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, my friend from Fort Hood, who's now the Army Chief of Staff, or maybe from Apple telling me that I need to reset my password, or from Google saying I need to execute some sort of maneuver. And then there's a link for me to click on. Is that what is commonly known as spear phishing? And once you click on that link, then they basically can take over your machine?
Yeah, you basically got that right. Looking back at 2015 and 2016, we did nearly 1,000 investigations into computer intrusions, and we have a skewed vantage point because no one hires us to respond to an intrusion when they're 5 minutes behind the hack. They hire us when the hack and the breach is already at a scale and scope where they need help. 91% of those breaches, victim zero, was in fact spear phishing, meaning that's how the Russian groups, the Chinese cyber espionage campaigns, and every capable hacking threat actor is breaking in. It is, in fact, a link to purport. It's a link or an attached document that comes to you. It looks like it's coming from someone that knows you, and it's got something relevant attached, or the link is to something you consider relevant to what you do for a living. And that's what we were talking about earlier. Is that's how we kind of know what the Russians were targeting. Is they're doing very specific spear phishes to very specific people. But that is the number one way human trust is being exploited, and that's how folks are breaking in.
Would you be surprised if a member of Congress was being targeted by a Russian or foreign government spear phishing operation?
I would not be, and I would expect every one of you is targeted on a near daily basis to this.
General Alexander, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Kevin said. So they're going to do research on you, know who your friends are, so they know you with Mark Milley from Texas. They know key things about you, perhaps your golf, and you have a friend that golfs, and they're going to send you something. Hey, how about this golfing thing? Click here or do this. And that's how they do it. Spear phishing is targeted on an individual that they do research and understand more about you to go after you as a person.
Well, Dr. Ridd, you talked about poor IT and cyber hygiene in the government space, and I think some of this can be as simple as updating your antivirus software, scanning your machine periodically and the like. But let me just mention the specific hack of the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. I mentioned it in an earlier panel. 21 million Americans had their personal information stolen in government custody. So even though they may have considered it private information, they were forced to give it to the government for security clearance or some other purpose. And now some foreign state actor through a cyber hack has access to 21 million private records, including more than 5 million sets of fingerprints. Is that the kind of information that cyber actors, either criminals or espionage agents from foreign governments, would use to further collect espionage or to steal or to implant ransomware or something in a machine or in a business and then shake them down for money?
Yes, absolutely. The more information, the more confidential information also you have, the easier it is to craft a spear phishing, a targeted email, a deceptive email, a forged email, so to speak. In my written testimony, I included a number of samples, a number of exhibits.
I saw that,
including John Podesta's.
Thank you for doing that. Well, one of the we don't have control over everybody's private computer or what kind of software they use, but we do have something to say, I think, about what the United States government does. And I think one of the things we need to be attentive to is to make sure the United States government networks are adequately protected. I know, General Alexander, you had something to do about that at the NSA, but you didn't have the ability to protect all of this other information. Let me just ask, I just have a couple of seconds, and since you're here, General Alexander, we're going to have to take up the reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, particularly Section 702. And I just would like to ask you, just since we have you here, a little bit about its importance to detecting and countering foreign cyber activity, and if you would also include in your answer the privacy protections that are a very, very important part of that, and oversight that you got to see firsthand in your capacity as head of NSA and Cyber Command.
I think that's the most important program that's out there, especially in counterterrorism. And I can give you a real quick example. Najibul Azazi in Denver was detected by that specific authorization. NSA saw that, provided it to the FBI, and Najibul Azazi was the individual in 2009 who was driving across the country to New York City when they arrested the individual in New York City based off of the other program. And they found several backpacks in various states of readiness to attack the New York City subway, done by that program. I think that's the most effective counterterrorism program we have, and I think it will be also effective in some areas for cybersecurity, although I don't have any examples off the top of my head here.
Could you just conclude your answer and talk a little bit about minimization and other privacy protections?
Right.
Because I think that's important to the American people to know that we're very vigilant and diligent in that area as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because we did a series of presidential review group on NSA after the Snowden leaks about these programs. And at the time, one of the board members of the ACLU, Jeffrey Stone, was on that panel, and I was kind of skeptical about this individual being on there, and I'm sure he looked at me somewhat askance. After 5 weeks of sitting down with our people and going through every one of those, he came up to me and said, "Your people have the greatest integrity of any agencies I've seen." And I said, "You don't tell me, tell the American people, tell Congress, tell the people of NSA, and tell the White House." And he did. And so there are some key statements by Jeffrey Stone that shows that we can protect civil liberties and privacy. And I think it's important to see some of his statements there, because what it did is he also asked me to write an op-ed. So imagine an Army officer and a board member of the ACLU writing an op-ed on reauthorizing the metadata program with some changes, and we did. And the reason, I asked him, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "The reason that I'm doing this is that if we don't have programs like this and we're attacked, we won't have civil liberties and privacy. And the mechanisms and the capabilities you have here to protect it are overseen by Congress, overseen by the courts, and overseen by the administration. Everything has 100% review on it, and I think that's the best way to do it." And he is right. If we do get another attack, they're going to ask Congress, they're going to ask the administration why we didn't stop those. I think this is exactly why we have to move down. I do think we have to be more transparent. I think in this, as we bring cybersecurity in here, having a discussion like this, open hearing about how we can protect these is absolutely critical for our country. And I have some statements, but I think your folks can pull those off the web from Jeffrey Stone's with a G. Thank you.
Senator Heimer.
Let me start by saying that I guess I can take some comfort now knowing that Senator Rubio and Senator Cornyn and quite a few of us have had these sort of sophisticated targeting examples where you end up having to make sure that everything's in place, that your devices were not penetrated. I've certainly had staff targeted. I've had family members who have received these very sophisticated spear phishing and other kinds of approaches. Sometimes you know where the IP address is coming from because your provider literally tells you, "Oh, by the way, if you didn't try to reset your account from Russia yesterday at 3:22 p.m., let us know." So, in having been through that a few times, one of the things that I've certainly shared with my colleagues, and you mentioned this, Dr. Ridd, is the importance of two-step authentication, and I think it just can't be sold to the public. Do you want to say just a couple more words about that and why that's so important?
Had John Podesta had two-factor authentication, the last month of the campaign, the last month of the campaign would have looked very different. I think that says it all.
That says it all. Yeah, I could not agree more. If given what we saw in 2016 and how easy it is to sometimes drive these wedges within our own society, what should we be expecting in 2018, and how should we be preparing for that? And that's open-ended for any of the three of you, if you want to share your thoughts.
Yeah, it took about 18 years for me even to figure out, as I responded to breaches, they reflected geopolitical conditions, but they actually do. What I think we're going to observe in 2017, 2018, the attacks will always exploit human trust. There'll be clever ways to do it. There are ways to get around two-factor authentication we've seen Russians use and as well as the Chinese government use. I think it's going to be more what's fair game to espionage. And I think that governments are going to start working on defining what are the industries that are fair game, what are the activities that are fair game, and what aren't, because quite frankly, every nation can get sucker punched in cyberspace because we're exploiting human trust.
How do you send those signals about what is over the line and what the consequences of crossing that line might be?
Well, that's why we have diplomats. I think we're going to have doctrine. We're going to have things that we publish. We're going to have to let people know what we think are the right activities and are the wrong activities. The private sector will participate. Governments will participate. We'll get alignment with some nations and misalignment with others, and we'll adapt to that.
Could I add to that? I believe
General.
that one of the things that you could do and encourage is with the states setting up an exercise program between the state governments and the federal government about how you're actually going to improve the security of that and what they need to do, set the standards. So I'd go beyond the National Institute of Standards and Technology. How do we know we're protecting voter registration databases? And what are the standards that we're holding them to, and who's watching that? And setting the controls in place. I think the states would greatly appreciate, so what are you going to do when we're being pummeled by a persistent threat? Now the government, the federal government, needs to step in, and that's part of Senator Feinstein's question. So how do you set, well, we haven't practiced that, we should practice that.
Agreed. Dr. Ridd.
With a very concrete suggestion that I think would actually make a difference. How many of the social media interactions, especially Twitter interactions, during the campaign of the most important Twitter accounts were created by bots?
Yes.
Were created by automated scripts and not humans? The answer to that question, we don't know the answer to that question because Twitter and other social media networks have not provided the data. You could write a letter to these companies and ask them to provide the heuristics, to provide the data. How much of a problem are bots?
Yeah.
And then
That actually, that's very much in line with my next question that I was going to direct to you, which is, in addition to looking at the data, are there things that we should be doing, working in concert with those social media companies to dampen the effectiveness of this feedback loop in the media cycle that is being exploited?
Absolutely. So you could, for instance, ask social media companies to provide detailed data, including a methodology of how they arrived at those data. It's very difficult for outsiders to get to the answer to these questions. How much of a problem are bots? And I think it is a very significant problem. When you sign up for a new Twitter account today, you can say, you know, the new accounts all have an egg face. You can say, I don't want any eggs, people who never change their account picture. No eggs is a good thing. Like, you can say, I don't want eggs, but you can't say, I don't want bots. Bots are more of a problem than eggs, I believe. So we should be in a position to, by default, move into an environment where we switch out abuse and bots out of our vision, if you like, as users.
Very helpful. Thank you all very much.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Alexander, first of all, it's nice to see you once again. Section 501 of the fiscal year 2017 Intelligence Authorization Bill which regrettably has not yet become law, requires the president to establish an interagency committee to counter active measures by Russia, including efforts to influence people and governments through covert and overt broadcasting. And the purpose of this committee would be to expose falsehoods, agents of influence, corruption, human rights abuses carried out by the Russian Federation or its proxies. Like the U.S. Information Agency, there once was an active measures working group that worked to counter covert disinformation from the Soviet Union, and that was disbanded. Is this a recommendation as we search for ways to counter the Russian attempts to spread propaganda, outright lies, influence our people? Is this a recommendation that you believe should be implemented?
I do. I think I would look at giving the administration a suite of capabilities from diplomatic through cyber, through what you just said, active measures, what we can do to expose that. I think we also need to give them the freedom to determine what's shared and what's not shared in terms of protecting the nation in that regard, sharing it all with Congress, of course, but how you publicize that if you know something is going on and you've got it through other means. I think those things you'd want the administration to at least be reasonable about, but I do think these are the kinds of things that should be put on the table. I would have to go back and look at all the tools that you're going to give them and say, does that meet the objectives of engaging Russia and confronting them when they cross the line on something? And I think in this case, this is something that would give them a tool if they've crossed that line to say, stop, here's what we know, and here's the consequences.
Because one of the aspects of this investigation that I found troubling, that we've already learned, is how weak our response is when we have a disinformation campaign. And it seems to me that this working group could be useful. I realize it's a delicate issue in some ways because you don't want to sweep up legitimate, you don't want to be trying to set the rules for journalists, for example. But that brings me to another issue for Professor Ridd, and that is, in your testimony, you talked about how Russian disinformation specialized perfected the act of exploiting the unwitting agent. And I assume by that you mean that individuals or entities who don't know or realize that they are being used by the Russians, but nevertheless are. And in your testimony, you use examples of Twitter and journalists who cover political leaks without describing the origins of those leaks as examples of unwitting agents that were involved in the Russian influence campaign in 2016. You also list WikiLeaks. I would put WikiLeaks in a different category personally. But what can we do about the unwitting agent? And I mean the truly unwitting agent.
Yes, I agree. In the case of WikiLeaks, it's unclear whether they are unwitting indeed or just witting, so to speak.
Right.
But I think we are trained to, the Western mind, if you like, is trained to think in contradictions. It's either this or that. But here, I think we're looking at a situation, and this has been a pattern throughout the Cold War, where active measures operators recognize that unwitting agents, this could be journalists, politicians even, members of parliament in the past, that has been the case, just because they're genuinely so passionate and engaged and activist in their outlook, further the Russian cause. I think we have to recognize that this will continue to be a problem. We cannot simply get rid of that problem. It is something, so for instance, we have documents from the Cold War time where disinformation active measures operators say they actually want conflict between the unwitting agent and the actual adversary, say WikiLeaks and the US government. Conflict is good. So that's how far you can take this. If the goal is driving wedges, then the unwitting agent is a trump card in your sleeve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Following up on that, it seems to me that the unwitting agent is a key part of this entire process, particularly where you're talking about disinformation. And I think you make the point in your prepared statement that anonymity, anonymous leaks, there should be more work on where did it come from. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the anonymity, WikiLeaks was purpose-built to hide the source. That is the goal of the entire platform. And of course, I think, and I do take Julian Assange seriously when, initially, at least historically, he was just an activist. But
he was a clearinghouse, but now he's a selective leaker.
That seems to be the case, yeah.
General Alexander, we've been talking about this for at least 4 years. One of the problems, and you talked about this with Senator Collins, this country has no strategy or doctrine around cyber attacks. Isn't that correct? And isn't that part of the problem? We need to have a doctrine, and our adversaries need to know what it is.
And absolutely, Senator, and I would add rules of engagement. We don't have, so the consequence is if there were a massive attack, we'd have to go back and get authority to act, where if it were missiles coming in, we already have rules of engagement. So I think we need to step that up as well.
And ironically, part of that is transparency, because if we have a capability that would act as a deterrent, but our adversaries don't know we have it, it doesn't act as a deterrent. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, if I could just add something, because Thomas brought out another issue, and I think it would be good to also, for the American people, to release perhaps collectively the number of vulnerabilities our government has pushed out to industry that has been identified by government, because often that's opaque. So what you wouldn't see is how much of that is actually being pushed to industry and how that's cleared. But you could get a collective summary from the departments and agencies that have pushed those out and see what's being shared. And I think that's a good thing, and it's a good way to start that dialogue.
That's a positive development, but I still believe that we need to develop a deterrence 2.0 to deal with the nature of the threats. And it doesn't have to be cyber for cyber. It could be sanctions or other, but there needs to be a certain response, a defined response, and a timely response. Otherwise, it's not going to have the deterrent effect.
That's right, and we have to get the roles and responsibilities of the different agencies. Who's actually going to conduct that response? And I think that has to be set straight and cleared. We discussed that in the other hearing, but I think that's something that also means that if we had to react, we wouldn't have the right people set up to react.
Mr. Mandy, one of the things, and I think this has been touched upon in the hearing, is the question of the vulnerability of our state election systems. And we know that the Russians were poking around, if you will, in our state election systems. I learned recently that more than 30 states now allow internet voting, and 5 have gone completely paperless. Doesn't this create a significant vulnerability?
It also creates an opportunity to do things even better. At the end of the day, when we look at, I go right to Estonia and what they do in their election process. I'm not totally intimate with it, but they have an identity management that's far better than our state, for our nation. When you have anonymity, it's really, really hard to secure the internet, and obviously we're going to always have attacks on these areas. But what we're seeing is every election year, and I've responded to breaches every election year since 2004. Both sides get targeted, things happen. We are still going up and to the right, and I'm confident a modern nation, and probably others could speak better to this, would reserve the tool of tweaking electoral votes or ballots to the last resort. And I've never seen evidence of that, and I think we'll always have a natural risk profile to show great diligence in how we secure the election process and a go-forward
Well,
basis.
my understanding of the intelligence is that it doesn't appear that they changed votes or vote tallies in this election, but they weren't going into those state election systems just for for recreation. There was some purpose.
Right.
And I think one question, which I think any of you could answer, but you can answer, 2016 wasn't a one-off. This is a continuing, ongoing, and certainly future threat, is it not?
I think so. I think right now when you look at intelligence, it's been totally redefined by the internet. People are searching YouTube every day to see what operations are going on by ISIS. So the intelligence collections that we have today has never existed in the past. It's just that during this election we saw Russia break rules of engagement they had traditionally followed, in that they added collections with computer intrusion, stealing documents and leaking them. But yeah, I think this is a tool everybody's going to use.
Dr. Ridd, you wanted to respond?
The Great Active Measures campaign of 2016 will be studied in intelligence schools for decades to come, not just in Russia, of course, but in other countries as well.
So not only will it be studied, it will be attempts made to replicate it.
That we can only assume, but it will certainly be studied.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask a question, Mr. Mendia. Your company has gone through an extensive amount of a background and be able to look at the DNC hack and the exfiltration of their data. I want to repeat again what you have said orally and what is in your statement, and any other details that you can give us. You felt that this was Russian intelligence. You have answered that yes, but much of what you have put in your written statement seems to be a circumstantial look at it, that you were basically eliminating other things. So let me ask you a question. Is this a process of elimination, much like a doctor doing a diagnosis, saying it's not this, 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 and then it must be this? Or do you think there's something that zeroes in and says, no, that's really it, and here's the evidence that links it?
I think that the intelligence available to the private sector is different for attribution than it is in the government. So we can only take it so far. We're not going to fly people into Moscow and troll the streets trying to find a building. We have to do it by process of elimination. We have to do it by just deduction. But at the same time frame, we hope the level of exactitude needed will come from the intelligence communities. But we've done this with China. China, we just got lucky. Their operational security broke down so we could get an exact building and some people. Russia's operational security on the internet is better than that.
Okay, so let me ask, there has been some conversation about Guccifer 2 being linked to the Russian government. Do you have any evidence of that or anything that would lead you to conclude that is true or lead you to at least disagree with the intelligence community on that?
I think it would be hard to think of any other. Here's what we do know. I would attribute the Russian government to the breaches. We cannot connect all the dots from the breach, at least with the observables available to my company and our investigators. We can't go from breach and leaked data to suddenly Guccifer 2.0. Okay. We just don't have the means to do that.
But you think they're consistent?
I think it's remarkably consistent. APT-28 intrusions are occurring, and it's APT-28 stolen data that's being leaked by DC Leaks, Guccifer, Anonymous Poland, and a bunch of other what we call fake personas or false personas.
Great, fair enough. So how confident are you that there's not any false flag operations that are involved in this?
We've observed this since 2007. I'm confident that APT-28, the hacking group, is in fact sponsored by the government or the Russian government.
Okay, fair enough. So let me ask you a question, and it's the ongoing dialogue that we have here all the time. How do you define a difference, what's thrown around commonly as we've had a cyber attack, or has been used in this conversation, they've crossed the line. We continue to talk about things like cyber doctrine, giving clear boundaries. We don't have any of those things. And this has been an ongoing conversation for a while about who would set them, how they would be set. But at some point, we have to have a clear statement of what is crossing the line. So earlier you made a statement, it would depend on the state, it would depend on the situation and such. Can you give me an example? Obviously, this is an example.
Right.
So other than this one, but give me an example of what it means to have a cyber attack that we can communicate to the American people. This is not just a nuisance hacker stealing information. This is an attack from a foreign government on our sovereignty.
First off, I go back to somebody made a comment once, it's hard to define pornography, but we know it when we see it. The reality is it's hard to delineate the cyber attack. I'll give you an example, though. I received a phone call once from one of our intrusion responders saying, we think North Korea hacked Sony Pictures. We went on site, we did the work, and we were as shocked as everyone that we even attributed that via our means to most likely North Korea. And then you start wondering, what levers do we have on North Korea to change their behaviors? And that's why I think attribution is critical. Got to know who did it, but I think the response will probably depend on our relationship with those nations and their cooperation.
Talk me through the difficulty of identifying who did
Right.
it as far as linking places when you get a chance to bounce and to be able to hide it in different ways. Is that becoming more difficult or easier based on the tools that we have or based on the tools that they have to be able to hide their location?
In the private sector, it's becoming more difficult for us to do attribution categorically. We used to have 40, we respond to hundreds of intrusions a year. By the end of 2010, 6 years of doing this, we only had 40 buckets of evidence. Every time we responded to a breach to figure out what happened and what to do about it, the trace evidence of what happened, cleanly into 40 buckets. Now we're into the thousands. The TTPs and the malware is changing, the infrastructure is changing. I would say actors are getting smarter about remaining anonymous in their attacks.
Okay, Mr. Ritter, quickly want to be able to ask you a question because you were alluding to this earlier, that a matter of an attack is not just a matter of going and deleting files or creating chaos. It could be manipulating an existing file where you lose trust for it or adding a file that was never there. And suddenly there's something appeared on your computer that you never put there, someone else added to you. So the threats of the attack that is out there, what could that look like?
We have concrete examples. A recent one is a critic of President Putin in London was hacked and allegedly, and I think the evidence is quite good, illegal child abuse imagery was uploaded to his computer as an active measure to undermine his, to make him into a criminal in the UK.
So they added child pornography onto his computer?
They didn't just download something, as in the case of the DNC hack, but they uploaded something.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimonies today and helping us as much as you possibly can, and we appreciate that. Let me ask this question. Could Russia have made a difference in the outcome if they wanted to? Did they get to the level that they could have gone further but stopped and we fell into the trap? Mr. Mandia?
In regards to the computer...
Basically, I'm understanding they were more aggressive than they've ever been, and they got more involved than they ever got. Could they have done more and just stopped, and then we fell into the trap?
I don't know if we fell into the trap. I don't know what you mean by that. I think
the trap is basically what we're doing right now.
Could be. I don't know. I can tell you this. I believe we probably know 90% of their cyber capability, maybe even only 80. They probably reserve their upper echelon, for maybe.
Could they have
duress.
basically changed the outcome of the election?
I have no idea. I don't know what they're capable.
You don't know if they're capable of doing that?
I think when I think of changing the outcome of election, I'm an engineer. I think ones and zeros kind of. I would say, could they have altered the votes? I think we would have seen that. I think we'll see the shot across the bow on some of the most severe attacks. Things where we have lots of observation, I think we'd catch the shot across the bow first.
Let me ask this question to anybody who wants to answer. How intense has their involvement been in other countries that we know in past? Is it to the level they've gotten to with the United States this past 2016 election? Are they that involved in France, Belgium, Germany? Dr. Ridd?
It depends on how far you want to go back in history. The Stasi, we know that for a fact, affected the outcome of one vote of no confidence in the Bundestag, which kept Chancellor Brandt in power. So we have many, many historical precedents of election.
How about in France going right now?
Right now. We currently do not have a single example in Europe, to my knowledge, where hack and leak were combined in the way it happened in the United States.
But their involvement in the election has shown they desire to get people of their that are more friendly towards the Russian.
Yes. I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing going on. In fact, there are active measures underway, but they are of a different kind of, it seems at this stage at least, than what we saw in 2016 here. They're more old school, more forgeries, like the Lisa case that Senator Rubio mentioned earlier.
Well, from the technology end of it, from the cyber end of it, do we have the ability to stop? And you're saying, what can we use and what is it going to be cyber warfare back to them? Is something that we can do to Russia that would stop this behavior? Or they would be concerned about how we could intervene or interfere with their system?
I think General Alexander should comment on that, but I can tell you, at least on defense in the private sector, probably the best analogy I can give you is a hockey analogy. It's like going up against Gretzky on a penalty shot when the Russian government targets your organization. They have a good chance of putting the puck in the net.
So there's a couple things, Senator, that I think we need to do. We talked about fix the defense. I think what we're doing right now with this committee and others is we have highlighted that we know they did this. They know that we know. And now the issue is they've been put on notice. And now it's over to our government of the path forward. And we have an opportunity to engage. and confront them on different issues. I think that in and of itself was something that perhaps they miscalculated. Now what we need to do is fix the defense and see what other actions we should take to defend our infrastructure, including the electoral infrastructure.
General, when Putin puts his statement out that he put out today, claiming no responsibility, no knowledge whatsoever, and we know, and the whole world should know, and we've made it official. How do you, I mean, he seems to have a very high rating in Russia, so I don't think they're going to believe us. Do we have the ability to show from a technical aspect what was done?
So I think one of the benefits of his actual active campaign is it's had a great impact on his popularity in Russia. He's taken us on in these areas. I think saying it wasn't us is something that he would say ad infinitum.
Sure.
We saw this across the board. Thomas brought out, all the way back from Moonlight Maze and before, Russian involvement, and they said it wasn't them. We knew it was.
Do any one of you three have what you would recommend as the greatest retaliation to Russia for this type of activity? Just start right down the line, if you will, Dr. Ridd. What would you recommend? How would we retaliate? And basically to make sure that we harm them or hurt them to the point they would not continue this type of behavior.
That's a tough question.
Militarily? Electronically?
Certainly not militarily. I think there would be an escalation that is entirely inappropriate.
Economically?
I believe it was the DHS publication at the end of December 29th, then Obama government pointed out, the administration pointed out RT as a major outlet of Russian active measures. At this stage, RT has a license in the United States.
So I think we should step back, Senator, and say, what is our objectives with Russia? This was a single event. I think we should have, this is where the administration, from Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and others should get together, and we should give them the opportunity in time to do this and say, what's our strategy going to be with Russia, which includes what you're asking. Because I don't think we want to do a tit for tat on these things and just accelerate. What we really want to do is how do we get an engagement with Russia that puts us in the world in a better place? And I think it's part engagement and saying, here's what we want to do. We know this, and we've got to figure out how to stop. And here's what's going to happen if we don't, and put those on the table. But I think that needs to be done more in private than in public if we're going to have a chance of success. It's in our interest to address these problems now when you look at what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Eastern Europe, and all the other problems we have. We've got to solve some of these by allowing the administration to engage in that area. So I would push it over to the administration. They have good people in this area.
My time, you want to go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. A lot of comments here. I've got a very simple, there's a carrot or a stick. There's either money or the 82nd Airborne over your corner, and I'd agree with everything the General said, not time for that. I would caution the response, if it's just in cyberspace, the asymmetry, if all our tools work against them and all their tools worked against us in cyberspace, Russia wins. So I don't think there's too much asymmetry in cyber based on our economy, relying on it, our communications relying on it, our free press even. They can do an invasion on the privacy of everybody in this room. We can't really reciprocate that, hack Putin's email and post it and get the same results. So I would just advise cyber on cyber. Just feels like we're in the glass house throwing rocks at a mud hut. We're not going to pan out very well there.
Thank you.
Senator Harris.
Mr. Mandia, so one main reason that we're doing this public hearing is so the American public can actually understand what happened. And so if we can just take a step back, because this is a fairly complex issue, in particular when we start talking about bots and all these other things. Some people wonder, is it just a short form for a robot? So I'm going to ask you, Americans, I think many whom I've spoke with, can't help but feel that they may have been played if they made their decision in this election based on fake news. How can they know that they are receiving fake news? How can they detect it so that they can ultimately make decisions like who will be their president based on accurate information?
I mean, that goes beyond my expertise as a cybersecurity individual. I can just say as a layperson, everybody's got to take everything they hear and vet it against multiple sources. But I simply don't have the right tools to be an expert on how do you determine fake from non-fake news.
Do any of you feel experienced enough to answer that question?
I mean, it's a simple answer. If it's in the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's not fake news. I mean, we have to believe in the center, so to speak. If we can't trust the mainstream media anymore, then we lost.
And could I add to that?
Yes, please.
I think part of it is we at times sensationalize and inflame, not inform. How do we get a more informed set of reports out to the American people on some of these issues? And that's something I don't have an answer to, but that's part of the problem. And we've got to figure out how to address that as we go into this next age of having all the information available at an instant. You saw the attack on the White House, the theoretical attack about a year ago. Yeah. It turned out to be fake news. I think we've got to take another few steps on that, and that's where the news agencies, social media, and governments have to work together to help get the facts out there. Just the facts, ma'am.
So tell me, I'm going to direct it, I'll start with Mr. Mandia, but whoever can answer this question, if you feel you have an answer. How can we tell if bots manipulated a Google search to elevate the placement of fake news in the 2016 elections? And what partnerships might we take with Google or any other search engine to avoid that happening in the future?
I think that's a great question. I think Google probably has the answer. Here's the reality, even it's going to be difficult for them. There's a lot of ways. What you're describing is what we used to call astroturfing. It's the way to manipulate public opinion, just get based on the number of hits and influences behind that. Depends on the platform. It's actually a complex challenge for us to pierce anonymity behind. Is that a bot or a human? Because bots keep getting smarter, replicating us.
And I would just add, I think Google has some great folks in this area, and that may be something that you get the folks at Google, Facebook, Twitter together, along with some of the other social media, and ask them that question, how can we jointly solve some of these issues? I think it's a great question and one that they would take on.
Social media companies the market assesses social media companies on the basis of the active user base. Now, if a certain amount of your active users are simply bots, there's a commercial interest in not revealing the fact that, a tenth, a third of your user base actually is machines.
Thank you. General Alexander, as a former general, I asked this question at the earlier panel. We invest in our military and our soldiers as part of our defense system, and rightly. But Russia seems to be investing a great amount in its cybersecurity as a tool of warfare. What would you recommend we do in terms of the United States government to meet those challenges, in terms of how we're investing in infrastructure to be able to combat both on the point of deterrence, but also resilience after we do detect, when and if we do detect that we've been hacked, how we can step back up and pick back up as quickly as possible, and then obviously what we need to do in terms of any sort of retaliation.
So I think there are several key points that we have to do. One is we have to fix the relationship between industry and the government for sharing information so that they can be protected. We have to set up the rules of engagement and the rules of what each of the departments are going to do, and they have to understand and agree to those. We have to rehearse that within the government and between government and industry.
And I only have a few seconds left, so I'd like you to direct your response, and I appreciate the points you made earlier on this point. But we have a budget coming up. What would you advocate in terms of the budget that is going to be before us to vote on? It's called a skinny budget. There's a whole lot of discussion about where the limited resources and dollars are going to go. On this point, what would you advise us in terms of how we distribute those limited resources to meet these challenges, the challenges in terms of the Russian government and the finding by the FBI and NSA and CIA that they hacked our systems?
Well, I think we definitely need to continue and increase the investment of what we have in our cyber capabilities, the forces and the infrastructure and the tools that we create. That's needed. I think we also have to look at, and one of the members over here brought out government. Our IT in government's broke. We need to fix it. And we need to look at how we secure it. OPM was a great example that they used. I think that's something this administration is already looking at, but we need to help them get there and figure out the best way to do that. And when you think about it, they don't have the IT resources or the cybersecurity professionals to actually defend them. The solution has got to look at what we do with the commercial sector and how we add that to government. I think those are the key things that I would.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Do any other members seek additional questions?
I would just like to
Vice
ask
Chair.
one quick. I think this line of questioning we've heard about how we counteract. I just very briefly, because the chairman hasn't asked his questions yet, but I do wonder. You know, we saw the example that somebody did hack into former Prime Minister Medvedev's files, which showed lots and lots of luxury properties all over the world. In many ways, that seemed to result in a series of protests across Russia where, unfortunately, protesters were arrested. But comment on that very briefly, because the chairman hasn't had his questions.
I'm not sure I understand the question properly. You're implying that
whether the challenge, I agree with Kevin, that the notion that a simply tit-for-tat real actions in cyber, because we're so more technologically dependent, but there are activities kind of around active measures where former President, now Prime Minister Medvedev in Russia, maybe I'm mispronouncing his name, but suddenly all his extensive property holdings became public, which caused great consternation in Russia and a series of protests.
Now, we know from publicly available information that the President Vladimir Putin believes the Panama Papers leak, which broke on the 3rd of April in 2016, so right in the middle of the ramped-up targeting. Targeting on their side ramped up before Panama Papers broke as a story, but we have to assume they knew about Panama Papers, that it was coming. Putin seems to believe Panama Papers was an American active measure against him. I mean, I don't think this was the case, but that puts the entire operation into a slightly different light, and it's important to consider that.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Listen, we really are grateful to all three of you for making yourself available. And Keith, you're a guy that the committee has looked up to, not just because of the stars on your shoulder, but it's the knowledge in your head and how you have had a way for years to convey to the committee in a way that we could understand it, what the threat was, what our capabilities needed to be, the actions that we needed to take, why we needed to take them, and the objective of the effort. I think what concerns me is that this thing's speeding so fast now, it's like you pulled the string on the top when we were kids. And over time, the top slowed down, and it looks like now the top starts spinning faster and faster and faster once you pull the string. So I want you to understand that we're probably going to invite you back in an informal setting, probably not in a public setting, where some of the things we got into today, we couldn't dig much deeper. And thank you for showing the constraint of doing that. And for that reason, I'm not going to include you in my other two questions because it might put you on the spot. I'm going to turn first to Dr. Ridd. Do we have any idea how Russia transmitted emails to Wikileaks? And if that's the process that everybody assumes happened, then how could WikiLeaks be, as you referred to, unwitting?
Good question.
Guccifer 2, the front that was created, tweeted that they gave emails to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks tweeted that they received something from Guccifer 2 before this was attributed to Russia. So that's the only evidence that we have publicly, and I think it's quite strong, or it's certainly notable. Is WikiLeaks an unwitting agent? In truth, we can't answer the question because they haven't spoken on it. But we also can't just assume that they're not an unwitting agent. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because they are a very effective unwitting agent.
Kevin, do the forensics that you're able to have done suggest that WikiLeaks continues to hold additional emails that have not been released?
I can't answer that. I can tell you from all my experience, what we've seen publicly released is probably under 1% of what we'd attribute to the Russian government stealing.
We're trying as a committee to come up to speed on not just terminology, but what that terminology means. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to walk us through how you identify an actor like APT-28.
Yes, and here comes the details. First, for the first time ever, we started getting better software in place beforehand so we could see keystroke by keystroke what they're doing. And I think most senators do not do command line execution, but there's different commands you can type. There's different letters that you type in different orders. You start getting to know the attackers when you get that command level access to them. And then it's the malware they've created, the IP addresses they use, the infrastructure they use to attack, the people that they actually target, the encryption algorithms they use, the passphrases they use when they encrypt things, and the list goes on and on. We tracked at one point, we created a schema in about 2006 on how do you categorize the intelligence or the evidence, the forensics from an intrusion investigation, and we had over 650 different categories. So I can't go into all of them today, but trust me, you observe a group for 10 years or more, after a while, we got the bucket right. APT-28 to us is a bucket. Every time we respond to them, there's enough criteria together that APT-28 is our APT-28. APT-29 is our APT-29. APT-1 was PLA Unit 61398. The link is we couldn't take 28 and 29 and say GRU or FSB. It just isn't available to us in the trace evidence when we respond to intrusions, but it's timestamps, compilation. I'll give you one last example because this is understandable. When you look at the malware that's been used in these attacks and their compile times, 98% or higher of it is compiled during business hours in Moscow or St. Petersburg. It's a pretty good clue. And whoever's doing it speaks Russian.
If you'd rather not answer this or don't know the answer, punt it and sure. I'll forget it. Had the DNC decided to provide their system for FBI to do forensics on, would we have gotten more information?
I don't know. I can tell you, I can't speak specifically to that one. But over the last 5 to 6 years, we respond to a lot of breaches now where the FBI is there. And they are there. And they're not the ones traditionally doing forensics. They are relying on a lot of the private sector forensicators. That's a made-up word. But we're doing our forensics. We're producing it. And the customers are choosing, our clients are choosing to share that with the FBI. I think the group that responded to DNC is highly technical, highly capable. They got it right.
It was a diplomatic way of answering, asking, do we have different capabilities than the private sector? And you said,
yes, we've had tremendous help. When we respond and the FBI is in the room, it's fantastic help. Maybe they're cleansing intel from another agency or not, but there's been numerous cases where we're showing up and we know maybe 3 things to look for. And the FBI says, here's another 80. Go look for those as well. So we are, and I've been doing this 20 years, it's more likely than not when we respond to an intrusion, the FBI is actually there and responding with us.
So I sort of leave this hearing not having heard a word that I think we're going to use frequently based upon what's going on, and that's docs. And my understanding of the term docs is it's the 21st century term for steal and leak. Am I going to hear docs a lot in the future?
Well, it's an irritating word to hear, isn't it? But at the end of the day, yes, you'll probably hear it. That's the technique that, it looks like a state actors using it. I can tell you the first time we saw North Korea delete things in the United States, that felt like it crossed the red line. Doxing appears to be the thing that crossed the line with the Russian activities.
Thomas?
One sentence on what Kevin just said about the FBI there. Usually in an investigation of the kind he was describing, you would make a so-called image of a computer, hard disk, and if the FBI has these images, which I understand they may have, then you don't actually have to physically be there. It's as good as being there physically. But on the doxing observation, yes, if I just to make another observation that may be personal for many of you here in this room, but the ethics rules in Congress may actually make members of Congress and in the Senate more vulnerable because it forces you to use different devices, sometimes as many as 3 devices, I understand, to make different calls and different communications. So even if the main work device is actually secured properly, then it would push you down into a more vulnerable area. That is a problem that possibly can also be fixed.
One last general statement, and I heed the advice you gave, General. You backed up Thomas, and I think, Kevin, you supported as well. Our response has to be well thought through. And it's not just what we do in reaction to, it's what we do as we set the course for some better defensive mechanism in the future. But you can't neglect the fact that Russia, over a period of time, has done things outside of cyber, the invasion of Ukraine, Moldova, presence in Syria, presence in Egypt. It continues on. That we might look at this today in the rearview mirror and say, boy, they miscalculated. The only way they miscalculated is to have taken our neglect of reaction to what they did as an opportunity to push a little harder on the accelerator. So not being critical, but we've done nothing to Russia when they've made aggressive moves. And now, all of a sudden, this happened at home. It happened with elections. When you look at it from a standpoint of impact, I think the Ukrainian people would tell me what happened to them is much worse. And if it happened in the United States, we would think that's much worse. But the fact is that this is going to require a global response because the globe is just as exposed as the United States. It was our election system in 2016. It is the French, the Germans. I won't get into the long list of them. But we're within 30 days. We're within 30 days of what is a primary election in France. It could be that the Russians have now done enough to make sure that a candidate that went to Russia recently and a socialist make the runoff, and they end up with a pro-Russian government in France. They won. That was their intent, I feel certain. We're not sure what the effects are going to be in Germany, but we've actually seen them build up a party in Germany, not tear down, but build up a party and exploit things that were, when you look back on them, fake news. Not that we didn't create, but that was created within Germany that never was news, but they used it, they exploited it, and look at what it's turned into. So we may have been the first victim, but we may not have been victimized as much as others are going to be in the short term, and we certainly should heed the warning and not be an additional victim in 2018 or 2020. Let me move to Senator King real quick.
Yes, just a follow-up question, Dr. Ridd. Tell me more about Guccifer 2. Is that a flesh and blood human being? Is it an office? And second question, is there any doubt that Guccifer 2 is an agent or somehow working for the Russian government?
Guccifer 2 is, we know this from the evidence that's available, not all of it public, but only in private sector sources and academic sources, I may say. Guccifer 2 is certainly not just one individual, because in private interactions with journalists, we can literally see different types of humans at play. Some use consistently at a specific time, lots of smileys and are very informal. Others are more formal, all communicating through the same channel. On the links, Guccifer 2 to others, APT 28, as I mentioned, and as I also lay out with evidence in the written testimony, hacked 12 of the targets that were leaked, doxed on DC leaks. Guccifer 2 provided a password that was not publicly known, provided a password to DC leaks to the smoking gun, the outlet. So that's a very strong forensic link there. The link, I think, the dots can be connected.
So, but how about my second part of my question? Is Guccifer 2 an agent of the Russian government in some way, shape, or form? If you mean by agent and agency, or a sort of organization, could be a subcontractor, could be a team within an intelligence affiliated or associated with the Russian government?
I am confident that the answer is yes, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank all the members, and I think our panel today, you have provided us some incredible insight and knowledge. We're grateful to you. This hearing is adjourned.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us and choosing us as your stream of choice. For today, they're done wasting the taxpayers' money, but I'm pretty sure they're going to continue. They're setting up Sally Yates to testify. They're setting up Jared Kushner to testify. They're setting up a whole bunch of other people to testify and just waste time, waste money, waste resources, and continue this rushing narrative regarding the president and his victory, because they just can't get over the fact that Hillary Clinton is a loser. She is crooked, and nobody wanted her as president. So they're going to continue wasting our money. The money that, just in case you had to pay this year for your taxes, whether it be through Obamacare penalties or because you didn't pay enough during the year, according to the IRS, or whatever it is, any tax that you pay is going to this. These idiots wasting it instead of it being spent elsewhere where it actually will make a difference, like right to our veterans or to our schools or anything in between. But no, these idiots want to spend it wasting time trying to prove something that can't be proven. And basically all this is just a podcast is basically what this is. They love wasting money. They love wasting resources. And the rhinos are just right there with them because, it's a cozy job and they don't have to do anything other than just, bull crap the whole time. I say bull crap because I can't say the other word. People will get mad at me. But yeah, that's all this is. Just a big old show, just wasting money of hard-working American patriots. And they're going to continue. So we'll see you guys here next time. We're going to be uploading some videos soon, so make sure to stay tuned for that. If you're new to our community, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you soon. Peace.